Tanager is here for children, teens, young adults, and families as they navigate the many stressors of the world today. Tanager inspires, empowers, and heals by providing tools and support needed to navigate the hardships of life and overcome obstacles. Our expertise and specialty trainings offer a wide range of approaches, and we'll join alongside you to create solutions to enhance your wellness. We are here for you and your family. Tanager, inspire, empower, heal.
Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning proudly present Together We Rise, a series based on the RISE Wellness and Resilience Framework. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, this show is a series digging deep and bearing witness to the stories regarding challenges that youth and vulnerable populations face within systems in our community. We hope this series will inspire hope and possibility to create a ripple effect, empowering community action and encouraging you to recognize the power of advocacy. The power of your voice can be a shining light, promoting change in systems that can better offer resilience and wellness in the life of youth and families. Because when we call on our courage and show up in the midst of barriers, we offer a bright place, inspiring ourselves and others to recognize that hope is possible and to not give up, because the youth of today and future generations need us. Together we can rise. Jenny, thank you so much for being here with us. Jenny, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Jenny Schulz. I'm the director of Kids First Law Center, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, thank you.
We are a children's nonprofit conflict resolution center.
Okay.
So our mission is really around giving children a voice in conflict, and that's a big passion of mine, is making kids seen and heard.
Yes, and you guys do such a beautiful job at that. You know, when we were thinking about doing this initiative, I felt like the work that you guys did was so important as a piece of this conversation, because restorative practices and how to navigate through conflict is such a vital thing that kids have to experience and have to navigate through, but also is such a huge piece of determining future steps of their life. So tell me a little bit about the work that you guys do and some of the biggest needs that you're seeing as it relates to kids and justice and reform and some of the experiences that they're having day in, day out in the systems that they're in.
So we have a restorative justice project in the schools, and restorative justice is really a method of addressing harm or repairing harm while restoring the relationship between the people who were involved in whatever event occurred.
Okay.
So we have peace facilitators stationed at 10 different schools, and so when there's a conflict between kids or a conflict between a child and their teacher, then we'll be sort of referred to that situation. Sometimes kids come to us, or teachers or administrators, ask us to get involved, and then that peace facilitator will meet with each of the participants individually and sort of find out like what happened, and also prime kids for thinking about that maybe the other person has a different perspective on what happened. And then bringing the participants together if they want to in what's called a circle. So in the world of restorative practices and restorative justice, as you know, it's sitting in a circle and talking. So it's a lot like mediation, but taking turns, talking about what happened, and then figuring out together what needs to happen to make things right. So coming up with, it might just be an apology, right? If it's something small, and if I tell you I'm sorry, and it's heartfelt, that might be enough to repair the harm. And sometimes there needs to be more that's done. So maybe if other people were affected, there might be an apology that's made publicly to a classroom. Sometimes kids have done a little bit of research if there was something like bullying. Maybe they read an article and reflected on it. If they made a mess in the lunchroom with a food fight, maybe they helped the janitor clean up the lunchroom, right? Things like that. So they figure out how to repair the harm. So that's essentially the work that we're doing in the schools.
Okay. So that seems different than traditional ways of approaching kind of stereotypical bad behavior. Tell me why this unique, innovative way of approaching children who are making choices that may be hurtful towards others.
You hear a lot of labels like, no, that's a bad kid, or
Yeah.
that kind of thing, or that kid's defiant or disrespectful. And but what we believe is that it's not that kids do well when they want to, it's that kids do well when they can. So a lot of times when kids are misbehaving, what might be happening is they just don't have the skills to manage their emotions or the tools, right, to deal with that overwhelm. They might also have a lot of trauma that's impacting how their brain is functioning. Yeah. And so there can be things that are going on behind the scenes, right? And once we as adults approach that misbehavior differently, I think that we can start to look at that child differently. So like I have kids I've worked with who, let's say, one of them like was labeled as oppositional, and then he was evaluated and they learned he was actually on the autism spectrum. Sure. It was really interesting because that changed so much his experiences at school, and what changed was not him. Yeah. You know, like that was just a label, right? Yes. But what changed was how the adults then interacted with him, and there was a lot more empathy and like, oh, he's acting this way because he has autism. Yeah. And so I think that goes back to, in any situation when we as adults understand that kids are behaving somehow because there's some need that they have, if we can instead focus on like fulfilling that need and meeting that need, then they're going to have a better outcome.
Yeah, so this is really about helping adults navigate some of those labels or perhaps those stereotypes or bias or beliefs that we have in a way that promotes positive youth outcomes, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
Rather than maybe traditional ways of disciplining or consequencing.
Right, so like when we go way back, we used corporal punishment in schools, right? And then at some point we were like, oh, bad idea. And so then you saw schools shifting to what was called zero tolerance policies. And so instead, you know, when you saw youth misbehavior, then we just pulled kids out of school. So it's called exclusionary discipline, which means we exclude kids. So they might get suspended, ultimately they could get expelled, they could get arrested at school. So basically misbehavior happens and we're going to send them home. Yeah. And the problem with suspensions is that they don't work. So what we've learned is they're not effective and they actually produce more youth misbehavior. Yeah. And that's because if you think about what happens to a child who's suspended, right? Let's say you're sent home for a couple of days because you got into a fight or made some disrespectful comments or wouldn't follow directions in class. At home, it's really unlikely that you're sitting there thinking about how sorry you are and that you need to change your behavior, right?
Like probably just playing video games.
Playing video games or engaging in riskier behavior.
Yeah.
And then when you get back to school, you haven't learned anything from it. You've gotten behind in class, so now you don't know what's going on. And then you're labeled by other kids, right? They're like, oh, you were suspended. Like, you got in trouble, and you're the bad kid now. Yeah. And you haven't, also if you had a conflict with another kid, like that never got resolved. And so it's still there. And for the kid who was harmed, they're sitting there at school going like, do you still have a beef with me? Yeah. Like what's gonna happen now? And so what we see is that kids who are suspended often get suspended again very soon after the first suspension. And even one suspension makes kids twice as likely of dropping out of school. So it's just the snowball effect, and that's what people call the school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
So suspension leading to dropping out, leading to ending up in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, and we have interviews in this series in relation to diversity, equity, and inclusion into schools and practices around that. We have conversations in regards to social emotional learning, but also conversations with the justice system and detention center, and just the way that we look at rehabilitation of youth. If I hear you right, Jenny, you're saying there's no such thing as really a bad kid. That kids do what they can with their resources and the knowledge and the skills that they have, and that part of our responsibility as adults, but bigger than that as a community, is to really look at what those needs are and help a child. We maybe in the with window, we talk about the social discipline window a lot with a child, both having high expectations but also a high level of support, actualize their full potential. And restorative practices is really a mechanism of doing that. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Right. It doesn't mean that we don't discipline kids, right? It doesn't mean that there are no consequences or no boundaries, because kids need boundaries and discipline. But it's to say, like, here are our expectations for you. And when you're not able to meet those expectations, we're going to help you, give you the tools that you need so that you can, right? Like, so there will be consequences, right, for things, when there's harm that occurs. We have to repair that harm and take responsibility and be accountable for it. But we also owe it to kids to say, like, okay, what's actually happening? Like, why, like, what's going on with you? Like, what do you need? And are you okay?
Yeah, because then I'm guessing the outcome of that is, rather than, the kid who is suspended comes back, has a label. So teachers, whether they know it or not, are kind of looking at the kid a little differently through a different lens, but also that kid may also then start to associate with peers who may also own a label of bad kid, right? And we know then if we're a bunch of peers who have all been labeled, I live up to what people believe of me. So if people don't believe that I'm worth much or capable of much, then it's really hard to be motivated to do well. And so it's really this idea of, rather than ostracizing those kids and sending them out into society with lack of resources, lack of tools, lack of skills to navigate the world in a pro-social way, it's saying, hey, why don't we wrap our arms as a community around this kid, give them the skills that they need so that our community can be richer in the end for that, right? Is that really the triple effect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it starts with also what kids believe about themselves, right? So I've come back to school and I've been gone. I'm like, they don't want me here. Nobody likes me, right? And when we exclude people and make them feel like they don't belong, they'll start acting like people who don't belong, right? So if we have kids who we keep pushing out of the school system or putting into the criminals or whatever happens, and then they drop out of school, they're not going anywhere. I always say they're going to be part of our community. And so wouldn't we rather have people in our community who have skills to manage their emotions, be aware of other people's emotions, listen, learn how to empathize, problem solve, build relationships, collaborate. Like, this is what every employer wants, right? Or is a workforce that can do those things.
It's interesting. I've heard this saying, and I'm sure you have heard it as well, that if we don't feel part of the village, we'll burn it down just to feel its warmth. And it really goes back to the RISE Wellness and Resilience framework when we talk about this essence of belonging, and how do I get that feeling of belonging? Because belonging is vital to our well-being and our resilience. It's vital to our survival. Right. And so what you're saying is, rather than exclusionary practices where the kid only feels like they belong in maybe gangs or struggled environments or doing harm to others, it's this idea of, no, you belong in a way that lifts up your assets and your strengths and able to empower you to go down a trajectory where you can be a positive member of the community.
I would guess no child with hope has ever joined a gang.
Yeah.
I mean,
say that again, Jenny.
Yeah, I think if kids have hope, they're not going to join a gang. And when we think about the systems that we have in place, sometimes I compare them to a home environment. So if you had a 12-year-old child at home who was misbehaving or who hit his sister or whatever, a parent would not say, get out of my house for the next 2 days and don't come back.
Yeah.
Or, we would hope a parent wouldn't do that, right? But so when that happens at a school, it's really that kind of feeling for a lot of kids, because for a lot of kids, school is the place where they have a sense of belonging, or that is like family to them.
Yeah. Jenny, we've talked a lot about, the offender, but a lot of this research is also rooted in the victim, and how hearing and having space and having amends be made can be such a healing process for them as well. That lots of times our judicial system in the United States is all about harm is done, send the person off, whether that's jail or prison, ostracize them. But that person who had harm done to them is still left without many answers, without understanding why that happened to them. So this essence of restorative practices and what you guys are doing, this can be also really beneficial to the mental health of the person who had harm done. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, for sure, for sure. There's a great book on that called Until We Reckon, for anyone who wants to know more, but that's about the criminal justice system and its brokenness in this country, and really talks about that about half of victims of crimes don't even ever call the police because they have decided the system doesn't work for them, but it's true, the system doesn't give the victim a voice. So aside from a victim impact statement, there's very little that the person who was harmed gets to say or have a voice in. And in the school setting, if you're a parent of kids, that like if something happened with your child at school, let's say they were harmed, and you call the school to say, well, what's happening to this other student, the school will say, well, we can't share that information because it's confidential.
Sure.
So there's also this sense of like sort of being shut out of the process of how are we going to solve this issue? I mean, both in the criminal justice system and the education system, it's all over the place. And so really this is about bringing in the person who was harmed and saying like, you have a voice in this. And we see that in circles all the time, that kids will say like, why did you do that to me?
Yeah.
And, a lot of times the child who did the harm is like, I don't know, I was just messing around, or I didn't know how much that hurt you. We had a girl in a circle one time who looked right at the boy and said she'd been picked on by this group of kids. And she said, I don't know if you know this or not, but I go home and cry every night.
Yeah.
And he was just stricken, like had no idea how his actions impacted her. And in fact, then there was a group of kids. So when the peace facilitator brought this girl in with another person from the group the next day, the two kids started laughing together, and she said, what's so funny? And the girl who'd been harmed said, oh, well, actually, she already apologized to me yesterday because the boy went to her and said, we really hurt her feelings. You need to go apologize. So when people who are harmed have a voice as well, then that helps build empathy in the person who did the harm, and it helps them feel more whole and more restored.
Yeah, because I'm guessing, when we have more empathy, when we can perspective take, this essence of emotional intelligence that often can be the very motivator to not doing harm in the future. Versus when, we're shunned out or we have a lot of shame, instead we're left with a lot of negative feelings that oftentimes actually make us feel more vengeful or want to blame others or do things to discharge that shame in a more negative way.
Right.
Jenny, so much of what we're talking about right now just lends directly into how we improve systems for kids and why this is so important. One of the big pieces of restorative practices, but also other things you do, is around conflict. We talk a lot in mental health about conflict because conflict is either avoided or escaped. Why is teaching kids how to navigate conflict so important for their mental health?
Great question. Well, because conflict is everywhere.
Everywhere.
Right?
We tried to deny it, but it's everywhere.
Conflict is everywhere. We have two people in any relationship, there's going to be conflict. So it's not a bad thing. It's just a thing that is whenever you have a relationship. And I think in general, if I were to just stereotype or sort of give a pretty broad brushstroke over adults, I don't think we model conflict very well for kids. You can look at our political leaders and kind of nationally at Congress, or just look at adults on Facebook with each other and sometimes engaging in conflict, and then adults say like, well, I'm going to unfriend them. I'm just not going to have anything to do with that person. So either things ramp up quickly or we just build walls and avoid people.
Yeah.
And kids actually have a different instinct, so we're always surprised by how many kids are willing to meet with the person they have conflict with.
Yeah.
Because they're just very practical about it. Like, well, I sit by them in math class, so yeah, let's do a circle. Right? Like I'm gonna see them.
Yeah.
And so I think we can learn a lot actually from kids too.
Yeah. I think the thing that's so important about navigating conflict, I hold this philosophy that when we engage in these hard conversations, it can deepen a relationship. It can deepen our understanding of ourselves, but can deepen an understanding of someone else as well. And when we have this deepened understanding, and it allows more curiosity as we navigate the world. And it's the very essence of curiosity that allows us to be open, to be more competent to people who are different than us, to have more inclusion. It's this ripple effect that all starts at the basis of being willing to engage in those conversations. Within the work that you guys do, what do you think holds kids back from these conversations, and how as adults do we really help them learn how to lean into this conflict more willingly?
Kids are so willing to do these circles, but it's interesting because adults a lot of times are nervous about bringing people in conflict together. So, they'll say, oh, especially with older kids, like, I don't think we should bring them together. There's a lot of fear around that. And just also sometimes when we as adults interfere with it, we can really muck it up. It's like, I'm going to have my own agenda for my child and what needs to happen from this other child. And instead of just letting kids figure that out and grow from those experiences, kids can do a lot when we just give them the freedom to figure those things out.
Yeah, so what I hear you saying is it's much more natural for kids, and sometimes as adults we kind of get in the way of that, and whether that's our own protective parts, our own fear parts, our own, life experiences centered around conflict and our belief system around that. But what I hear you saying through and through is that a child who is able to navigate conflict and even do it in a restorative way is much more likely to be successful in environments, to be able to have more healthy relationships, have improved wellness, mental health, that this is vital for them.
Yeah, kids are gonna, kids who learn how to manage conflict now will be able to use those tools in their future relationships, intimate partner relationships as adults, but also in their friendships. It will aid them in their employment, when they have conflict with a coworker or with a boss. Driving down the street in traffic conflict, right? Like
someone cutting them off.
Right. We can do better.
Yeah.
And I think, giving kids those tools, because conflict resolution is something you have to practice to get good at. You're not just going to read about it in a book and say, okay, I know how to resolve conflict now. So when kids can practice what happens in a circle, then we can see them using those tools on their own.
Why isn't this in every school? Why isn't this embedded in our justice system? Why isn't this the current way of being if we know it has such positive outcomes for the growth and development of our youth and next generations?
Funding is always a barrier, I think. We need to fund our schools. I had a child tell me the other day, we need more teachers in break rooms with kids so that when kids are having a hard time, they can go there and get the help they need. That's of course, right? Because teachers, we put so much on them and are expecting them to just fill their day with teaching, but there's all this stuff that's going on in kids' lives that they need help and support with. So we could have 3 peace facilitators in every school that we're in and stay busy.
Yeah.
And, in the end, if we could focus more on building relationships, helping kids do that, helping them with their social emotional learning and their skills, then the other stuff would fall into place a lot more easily.
I think as a society, it seems that we've believed for a long time that fear is going to be the thing to deter humans from criminalized behavior.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. But what I hear you saying does work is relationships, connection, building
people.
Bridges.
Yes, showing people a better way.
Showing people a better way, absolutely. And I'm sure in the long run, it would be more cost efficient, it would be more effective. And if you just look at the ripple effect of it, right, this potentially, if intervened really young, to teach these skills and to give these resources could prevent long-term costs that are certainly weighing down our society and our communities.
Absolutely. We do work with kids starting in kindergarten, and it's amazing what they can learn, and we've seen them out on the recess pretending to be the peace facilitator in their school, trying to have little mock circles with each other. So they can pick it up so quickly.
Yeah, and I'm guessing they want this. It's probably a very uncomfortable feeling to know I hurt someone, but I don't know how to navigate how to make that right.
Right.
So really just thinking, how do we build systems that have this philosophy embedded in everything that we do, in the way that we think about kids and their needs?
And I think it's changing. We talk a lot more now. I mean, you work with a group of kids now, and so many of them have learned about breathing and, how to self-soothe and things like that in school. I think teachers are amazing and have learned so much. All of us have learned more about how the brain functions and how unique and complex it is, and how we have to figure out individualized solutions, or interventions for kids. So I think we're learning a lot more about trauma and the impact of, stress. One stressful event kicks my, cortisol levels in, adrenaline, right? But if that's all day long in an abusive environment or a chaotic home environment, it's hard not to just be on alert at all times then and set off super easily. So I think the more that we as adults learn about that's why that's happening to this child, then the more we can approach it too with empathy, which helps us just stay calm and give the tools, right? It's all.
Yes. It starts with us as adults, though, is what I hear you saying, right? And the way that we look at situations, the way that we try to understand kids, try to make sense of where behaviors could be coming from, and our role in help cultivating that wellness and resilience. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for everything you guys do in the community, for being such an activist for this work. I think this work can change the future, so it is vital and it is required for next generations. Anything that you want to add that we didn't get to?
Thanks, Tanya. This has been fun.
Okay, thanks, Jenny, so much for being here.
No matter the challenges you and your family face, Tanager is here for you. Our team of specialists in mental, emotional, behavioral, and social health want to join alongside you during these tough times. Tanager will offer the tools needed to inspire, empower, and heal, while providing the support you need to build the strongest foundation for success and wellness. We'll meet you wherever you are in your journey, and together define a path to reach your goals. Together we rise. Tanager. Inspire, empower, heal.
Thank you again for joining us today and for spending time with us. We hope today's segment offered hope and healing. Today's series brought to you by Tanager and the Meraki Institute of Learning. For more information, please visit our website at www.tanagerplace.org.